Good evening. Welcome to another edition of the Queen's Grapevine. This is your host, Wallingford Lee. Tonight on the Queen's Grapevine, we're going to talk about some domestic issues. Domestic issues that affect all of us as a family and as a community, issues that appear in a lot of community. Child abuse is a very rampage situation that have taken place not only in New York City, not only in the borough of Queens, the Bronx, and of course Manhattan, but worldwide. So we want to take this opportunity tonight in the Queen's Grapevine to talk in the first segment of our program, the importance of child abuse, where to go for help, and how to carry yourself around your children. How important it is for you to recognize the importance of children. Children are the women and men of tomorrow, and as such, we are parents, as parents, should know how to raise them, how to educate them. But in some instances, a lot of problems take place, sometimes because of fatherless home, sometimes because of a motherless home, and sometimes because of a background behavior a certain individual and certain children get abused. Abused, literally, some of them do even get killed in circumstances. So as we continue tonight talking about child abuse, you're going to have the opportunity where we interview a lady that's an expert in child abuse, a lady that have worked with a lot of mothers, a lot of children. I'm talking about Miss Marta Flores. Marta Flores had been a great advocate of helping children and of helping mother. So as you sit back tonight, and a grapevine, you're going to get a great deal of education on how to go about solving certain issues on child abuse, where to go for help, where to call in case of emergency. As we sit tonight in this interview talking to Marta Flores about child abuse. Good evening. Welcome to another exciting program of the Queen's Grapevine. This is your host, Wallingford Lee. Tonight on the Queen's Grapevine, we want to talk about child abuse. There's estimated 300 million children worldwide suffering some type of form of child abuse. Verbal, physical, malnutrition, and I can go on and on. So, as I have always said in my program, the children are the men and women of tomorrow. We need to protect them. We need to be cognizant of their need. And more importantly, any child that has been abused that you know of, do not hesitate to call the authorities. Do not hesitate to bring this out in the open, because children are children. That's exactly what they are. And they're helpless and defenseless in most cases. So tonight we want to take the opportunity to talk to someone who has the background and who has worked with people with child abuse. I'm talking about Ms. Marta Flores. Welcome to our program, Ms. Flores. You know, it's good to have you again. We had the opportunity to talk to you a little bit about domestic violence. How widespread is child abuse?
Child abuse happens every day. I get a lot of cases from the Administration for Children's Services, Child Protective Services, and it's happening every single day as a result of a lack of education relative to how individuals who are parents should be parenting. Parenting seminars are very important. They're educational, even for those parents who don't think that they need parenting, because we parent as our children, as our adults have parented us, and we pass on those traditions, and we affect our children.
So it's very worldwide spread in total, because you know sometimes you read some very crazy things in the newspaper, or you hear things on television that it's kind of unbelievable to know that. You know, I read in the paper about 6 or 7 months ago in Harlem, a lady put a child in the oven because the child was crying too much, when she could have easily put the child up for adoption or call for help. So something like this, it is just scary. It's and there's no other way of putting it. How could something like that happen? And you talk about that there's help. So this thing is something that is very widespread. Can it be avoided?
It can be avoided if the community gets involved. You know, back in the days when I was growing up, the community was always involved. The neighbor was your extended family. And these days, the neighbors, they just disregard what goes on around them, and the environment is very important for children. The community is part of that environment. If the community sees something, they must say something. And in particular, there's a lot of families with no insurance. Those are the cases that are sent to community prevention alternatives. And we help those families in crises. We need more organizations like Community Prevention Alternatives to help individuals that lack insurance.
So when we talk about child abuse, what is your direct interpretation of child abuse?
Child abuse is malnutrition, or the way you're parenting your children, corporal punishment. Now you can go to jail for corporal punishment. Back in the days when I was growing up, it was okay to hit a child with the belt. That is no longer acceptable because it leads to mental problems with a child. It leads to a lack of wanting to learn in school. When you
So
see,
spanking is not okay.
spanking is not okay. Absolutely not okay.
So how do you discipline a child that has been rude, that you see a certain behavior pattern in the child? How do you discipline? How do you bring him up? And I'm not an advocate of spanking. Let me be very clear of that. But what are the ways to go? And I'm doing it for a purpose because I want our viewing audience to understand certain things.
You have to do what they call positive discipline. Positive discipline and time out, appropriate time out. Let's say a child is 3 years old, there's 3 minutes of time out, and you don't go beyond that. Going beyond that would be considered child abuse. Let's say that the child has an interest in certain toys and certain activities. You remove those activities to modify the child's behavior. Beating them, spanking them only causes mental health problems.
And if those things that you talk about does not work, then what?
Then you go to counseling, you go to an agency like Community Prevention Alternatives, where there's what we call therapeutic play. Therapeutic play, we teach the parents to do therapeutic play with the children, with the expert observing and discussing how to better interact with a child.
Something like when you talk about your center that you work for or that you run, some therapeutic thing like that, how long a process like that takes?
Well, you know, like I said earlier, parents parent as they were parented. So basically, it can take a long time because we're talking about decades and generations of dysfunctional parenting that needs to be modified or changed.
Well, one of the things that I have seen a lot in the street, and it's a very difficult thing, like a woman will go to a store with a child who is extremely hyper, who screams and yells to get certain things, and he gets into a temper tantrum on the floor and stuff like that, and the whole world is looking at in the store. What should be the reaction of a parent of something like that?
The reaction of a parent is to be therapeutic, to pay attention to that child, not to disregard the behavior. And nutrition is important, dieting is important, because this could be a child that has attention deficit disorder, and cutting down on the sugar, that has helped. Making sure that this child is not drinking coffee. You know, a lot of parents think that it's appropriate to have caffeine in foods, certain beverages that make the child even more hyper. And sometimes you can modify that just through diet.
It's interesting that you would mention that because I've read that you can do that type of modification through diet, and that there are other things that you can do through therapy to help a child like that if it's not too far gone. At what age you should start observing those type of behaviors that we're talking about?
That comes prior to the child being born, the prenatal process. The neonate process, the child eats what you eat, the child thinks what you think. Being therapeutic as far as social, music, therapeutic, calming, eating the appropriate foods, that child will be nurtured appropriately.
I couldn't agree with you more, but one of the things that kill our society, and it's worldwide, it's not only in New York, is children having children. What I mean by children having children, a young lady not going to school, getting pregnant immediately, as they would call it in the street. She has one in the tank, meaning she's pregnant, and one already into a roller. How can a young person that's between 17 or 18, without a proper education, with any proper common sense or logic, bring up a child or care for a child? So we talk about children having children. How do we avoid those things, man? What type of help can we give them to avoid them abusing their children? Because frustration leads to a certain amount of abuse, of child abuse. Okay, not having meals, not knowing where the next dollar is coming from, not knowing how to bring up that child, and not having a father in some cases. Sometimes they're living with their own pace, with their own parents itself, and in some cases they're on welfare. How do we work these type of correlation?
I think that the parenting seminar is very important, and when children are going to be removed from the parents, we have what they call the 12-week parenting seminar. Sometimes we have to extend it, sometimes we have to include the parents, and as I said before, the children parent their children as they were parented. So the parenting seminar becomes very instrumental in making those modifications and the safety of children.
Obviously, it's a big component, and to get the word out in order to save these children and give them the help that they need before it gets totally out of control, before it gets totally out of hand. Let's talk about a young female who gets pregnant. Father's nowhere to be found. How does she go about being not prepared because of having a child? Is there a possibility of adoption, giving up the child for adoption? How something like that would work?
I think that including the extended family is the first priority, and I think that having agencies as community prevention alternatives to provide provision of services to assess what services need to be rendered, a treatment plan, so to speak, that would be helpful in helping our teens to make those tough decisions.
And those are obviously very tough decisions. Well, we're jumping around a lot, but it's very important because we're talking about child abuse. What are some of the signs of child abuse from the outside? You visit a home and you see certain things. What are some of the signs of child abuse to know that a young child, let's say 3 or 4 years, has been abused?
Well, we start to take a look at the cabinet, the refrigerator. We start to take a look at how they're dressing the child. We start to take a look at malnutrition, the health condition of this child. A physical is going to be a priority. Getting school records are going to be a priority. These are all the tools that we need to make an assessment of the level of child abuse that's going on in the home.
How important is the Department of Social Services on something like that? That, let's say, for instance, say they have been called by a neighbor saying that there's an issue next door, not enough food and not enough care for the child. How does the Department of Social Services handle that?
The Department of Social Services will make a home visit, and within 24 hours they make a home visit, and they make that assessment. And immediately they step in with a caseworker, and they work with other agencies to collaborate, community prevention being one of those agencies. I think education is key. Cognitive therapeutic training for individuals is very important to allow them to understand the importance of nurturance and proper conduct when it comes to parenting.
How important is followed by the Department of Social Service? You come into a situation where obviously food and money is an issue. Young mother, not having the means and the ways. And you talk about education, which is extremely important, and it's a key component. But what's their follow-up process on something like that? They come back 2 weeks after. Do they administer some type of form to make sure the child and the mother has enough food? And are they cognizant that this mother would need a certain amount of education?
Yes, sometimes budgeting becomes an issue, making sure that they have services rendered for the child and mother, making sure that they have certain supports in place. And I think that it's a 6 month, it'll be 6 months before they close a case, and until they see an improvement, and then they still come back to check in, and they leave it with a preventive agency such as Community Prevention Alternatives.
I think that was a very key component you talk about, that 6 months period, because I think the follow-up process is a key component, because it might seem like everything is okay, but there should be some type of stability. Let's talk a little bit, let's advance a little bit more. The kid now is 4 or 5 years old, and he goes to school, and the teacher begins to see certain amount of marks on the child's body. What is the responsibility of the Board of Education or the teacher to report these things or to question a child? And I know some of these questions are somewhat difficult, but that's the purpose of it, because sometimes we knew a particular case that I don't want to mention that happened back in the 80s, right here in New York City, Manhattan, with this couple who had an adopted child. In the interim, they were well off, but the punishment that they did on the child led to the death of the child, and it was worldwide. How important it is what the teachers see and the teacher responsibility to report these things.
The great advantage that we have in New York City is that most cases are reported by the educators. Most of the cases that come to the Administration for Children's Services are investigated as a result of a teacher filing a report or expressing a concern. I think we have an excellent education system. We have great advocates as teachers in New York City, and if they continue that as mandated reporters that they are, it's taken very seriously.
I'm happy to hear you say that, because I'm one of the strongest advocates of knowing that the teachers are good here in New York City. They don't get the due respect from the mayor's office that they really truly deserve, and they do a very, very good job. We'll be right back on the Queen's Grapevine as we continue talking about child abuse on the Grapevine. And we're back here in the Queen's Grapevine as we continue talking about child abuse, something that is extremely serious and devastating in the community. We know for a fact in some of the research that we did that some people are sick, very sick, and have used some of the children in child pornography and stuff like that. How widespread is something like that? Sometimes you see on the news, on television, and newspaper. How widespread something like that, where parents or grown-up use child and pornography?
Well, I have to tell you, it's really sad, but as I said earlier on, children model the behavior of their parents, and they find it acceptable. And sometimes it's a big, dark secret, unfortunately. When you start to see parents who are overprotective of a child, in particular, I'll fall back on a case a couple of summers ago where I was going to a private pool, and there was a child that was coming with the father, and I discovered that the mother was a prostitute, but the father was doing some very strange, bizarre things with the child. And it wasn't until they discovered that the father was doing something else that was illegal that they discovered that he was having sex with his son. And it's unfortunate, but when you see that it's almost like domestic violence, the overprotectiveness of that individual, the control factor, and when you see that a parent is controlling, there's something underneath the surface that's going on that needs to be investigated. But it's very prevalent. There are people that are very bizarre out there, and you will not make that assessment until you see other factors that lead you to see the real problem.
Very scary when you sit down and think about something like that something like that could happen between a parent and a child. Let's go a little bit further. Let's say, as a parent, are you supposed to, or at what age you start telling the child about their sexual organs and they should not be touched by anyone? At what age should that take place, and what picture does the school plays in that?
Well, I think that it starts in this new day and age. I remember when I was growing up, and You know, parents are always playing with the genital of the child, saying, oh, how cute it is, etc. Taking naked pictures of children. That nowadays is found to be very unacceptable, very, extremely unacceptable. Changing that trend is very important because it doesn't open the door for child pornography. And back in the days, it was acceptable from a cultural perspective. So a lot involves cultural perspectives, and those cultural perspectives need to be changed.
I'm happy you mentioned that because in today's environment with the internet and with the maniacs and sick people out there, I don't think any parent should be taking pictures like that and even sharing it with anyone in today's environment because we live in a very dangerous and sick world, no question about it, and exposing your child to something like that and with all these psychopaths out there, it's extremely, extremely dangerous. Let's talk about a little bit about emotional abuse. What are some of the signs of emotional abuse to a child?
Emotional abuse, you can see it in behavior, you can detect it in behavior. I know that going back to some social cultural perspectives, you know, back in the days, your parents didn't have to say anything. They just had to give you a certain look. But these days, that's considered corporal punishment as well. And basically, we have to take a close look at how the child behaves around the parent and begin to educate the parent that life is about being therapeutic and positive discipline because it is considered abuse.
Do you use also a hotline or zero hotline in your center? Is there some type of abuse for someone to call?
Absolutely. The hotline is open 24 hours a day as long as I'm not sleeping. And when I wake up, I respond to the call. And the hotline can be used at any point in time. You can call me directly on 718-909-4634 for all cases across the board, any time of the day.
In today's environment, have you seen a better progress in parenthood with children in terms of abuse? Or parents are a little bit more educated today, or because of the different resources out there, they're a little bit more prepared compared to, let's say, 10 or 15 years ago?
Not only the resources that are out there, but the law enforcement. That is what is making our parents who pass on those traditions from their social cultural perspective to modify their behaviors because they know that there's a consequence. And it's unfortunate that there has to be law enforcement involved for individuals to understand that children need a better quality of life.
Obviously, children then must have a much better quality of life. As we started this program, we started by saying that they're the women and men of tomorrow, and we should prepare them, we should nurture them, and we should take better care of them. That's our responsibility as a parent, the responsibility as a grandfather, the responsibility as an uncle to always bring up this child or these kids into a better environment. As we move forward, and I have probably about a minute, is there a message that you would like to send out to parents who are raising children who are frustrated by the system or frustrated by life, and sometimes go a little bit further with not so much physical abuse but verbal abuse? Is there a message you'd like to give them and tell them where they can go for help and stuff like that?
Well, the message is that the ghost from the past comes to haunt a parent, and you parent as you were parented. And basically, those behaviors need to be modified. It's considered abuse. Community prevention alternatives will always be available to introduce educational workshops, individual group sessions, and to help as much as possible many parents who have been abused in the past, those who are abusing their children, and they need themselves to get help and to stop allowing the ghosts from the past to haunt them for the rest of their life.
Well, obviously, they need to come clear and to get out of that dark secret and that dark room. Again, on behalf of the family of Grapevine, I don't have words to thank you for your input, for your view, and for the great job that you're doing in the community, helping people who have these type of issues and these problems. We don't have words to thank you for that. You know, it's good to have in the program, of course.
Well, I thank you for giving me the opportunity and for giving the public the opportunity to access community prevention alternatives for families in crisis.
And that keynote from Ms. Flores, I want to say thank you so much for viewing our program and continue watching the Queen's Grapevine. We'll see you next week at the same time, at the same place. And again, this is Wallingford Lee saying good night for the Queen's Grapevine. Thank you. We hope to see you next week at the same place at the same time. I want you to know that the Grapevine is shown in Westchester, New York, on Channel 18 every Fridays at 9 p.m. and also out in Queens, of course, on Channel 34 and Channel 56 every Tuesday night at 9 and every Wednesday night at 11 o'clock. And of course, we're out also in Long Island and Channel 18. And don't forget that we're also on YouTube. So continue watching our program as we continue to be a servant of the community, serving you with information that are important to you. Again, this is Wallingford Lee saying good night for the Queen's Grapevine, and thank you for watching our program. And we hope to see you next week at the same place at the same time. Good night.